All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going deep into the world of philosophical writing.
Oh, yeah, always a fun one.
It can be intimidating, right? Especially when it comes to actually structuring an essay. That's what we're looking at today, Chapter 3. The structure of a philosophical essay.
Right.
Like, how do you even begin to organize all those complex ideas?
Well, the chapter starts off kind of simple. It says, a good philosophical essay needs, well, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. But does it get more specific than that?
Oh, absolutely. It lays out this detailed outline, breaking down all the parts you need. But, and this is key, it's not a rigid thing. You can adapt it to fit your essay.
So it's more like a framework than a strict template.
Exactly. It gives you the structure, but you get to kind of build on it in your own way.
Okay, I'm kind of seeing the light here. But let's get real. I'm picturing myself staring at a blank page, completely lost. How does this outline actually help me write?
Well, that's the beauty of it. The chapter walks us through an actual essay, a real-world example, called Hobbes' Divine Command Theory of Morality.
Whoa. Hobbes, morality, divine command, that's a mouthful.
Right. It's a fascinating essay, and it shows you, step by step, how the author used the outline to structure their argument.
So it's like we get to peek behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And see how a pro does it.
Exactly. It's all about technique. For example, they use these really clear transitions between paragraphs, which, it might seem basic, but it makes all the difference.
Yeah, I can see how that would make the essay so much easier to follow.
Right, and they point out where the author could have expanded on certain points if the essay was longer, which is helpful to see, because it shows how you can adapt the outline to fit different lengths and complexities.
That's really clever. So it's not just for short, simple essays.
No, not at all. This outline, it can grow with you as your thinking develops.
Okay, this chapter is sounding more and more useful by the minute. It's like having a personal tutor for philosophical writing. But what else is in there? What other secrets does it reveal?
Well, there's this writing technique called successive elaboration.
Successive elaboration. I've never heard of that. What is it?
So picture this. You have your big idea for your essay, right? Successive elaboration means you start with just one sentence capturing that core idea.
Okay, so we start small.
Yeah. And then with each draft, you add more. Layers of detail, explanations, evidence, like building a house brick by brick.
I like that. Building it up layer by layer.
Exactly. So you never lose sight of your main argument as you develop your ideas.
This is starting to sound a lot less scary than I thought it would. So we're not just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
No. We're crafting deliberately. And the chapter really emphasizes how helpful this can be, especially when you're dealing with really complex philosophical concepts.
Right, because then you can break them down into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And then build them back up.
Exactly.
So chapter 3 is basically saying, don't panic. Here's a roadmap, some tools to help you build a solid philosophical essay.
That's a great way to put it. It's about empowering you to tackle those big questions and communicate your thoughts effectively.
Okay, that is encouraging. But let's be honest, even with the best roadmap, you can still get lost. What else does the chapter offer to help us avoid that?
Well, it reminds us that we're writing for a specific audience, our professor, and, well, let's
But you probably know a lot more about philosophy than we do.
Right. And that can feel, a little intimidating. But the chapter actually frames this as an opportunity.
An opportunity?
Really? How?
But because you're not trying to teach them something new. You're trying to show them, you understand, that you can explain the ideas clearly, that you can build a solid argument.
So it's more about demonstrating my thinking process than trying to, blow their mind with my brilliance.
Exactly. And to do that, the chapter stresses how important it is to define your terms clearly, even if you think your professor already knows what they mean. So clarity is key, even when we're dealing with those really dense philosophical concepts.
Absolutely. And speaking of clarity, there's this really interesting idea the chapter brings up, this transcendent perspective.
Transcendent perspective. Okay, now I'm really curious. What does that even mean?
It means basically you step back from your writing, look at it with fresh eyes, like you're the reader seeing it for the first time.
Oh. So I pretend I know nothing about the topic and try to read my own essay.
Exactly. You put yourself in the reader's shoes. Ask yourself, does this make sense? Is the argument clear?
I can see how that would be helpful. To catch any gaps in logic or places where I haven't explained things clearly enough.
Yes, It's like having a built-in editor in your brain.
That's pretty cool. Okay, this is all starting to make a lot more sense. I'm feeling much more confident about tackling those philosophical essays now. But we've covered a lot of ground already. Maybe we should pause here, take a breath, and we'll pick up the trail in part 2.
Sounds good to me. You know, this transcendent perspective, it reminds me of something else, something that chapter talks about, using ordinary language.
Ordinary language. Interesting. Does that mean I have to, like, dumb down my writing for my professor?
No, not at all. It's not about simplifying the ideas. It's about expressing them in a way that's, well, accessible, engaging, avoiding jargon.
Right.
Or overly technical language.
Right. So it's like translating those complex ideas into a language that anyone can understand.
Exactly. Even if they don't have a PhD in philosophy.
Makes sense. It's like you really have to know something well to be able to explain it simply.
You got it. It's like, imagine being a tour guide in a foreign country.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You can't just point at things and say their names in a language the tourists don't understand. You have to translate, provide context, tell a story.
Oh, I love that. So we're not just presenting information, we're crafting an experience for our reader.
Precisely. We're guiding them through the world of our philosophical argument.
This is great. It makes me think about chapter 1, actually. The roles of author and audience. It's kind of unique in philosophical writing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Unlike most writers who get to choose their audience, a student writing a philosophy essay, they have a very specific audience, their professor.
Right, who's also the one grading the essay.
Exactly. And they're not just a passive reader, they're actively evaluating your work.
Yeah, it's like we're performing for a panel of judges who are scrutinizing every word.
It can feel that way sometimes. But the chapter, it presents this dynamic as an opportunity.
Okay, I'm listening. An opportunity? How so?
Because in most writing, you're trying to convince your audience, to persuade them to see things your way. But in a philosophy essay, the goal is different.
Different how?
The goal is to demonstrate your understanding, to show that you've engaged with the material, that you can think critically, independently.
So it's less about winning them over to my side and more about showing them how I think.
Exactly. And that takes, well, a certain amount of courage, which the chapter actually talks about, intellectual courage.
Intellectual courage. What do they mean by that?
It means being willing to take a stand, to defend your position, even if it differs from your professor's.
Ooh, it does sound kind of courageous, especially when you're facing an expert.
Right. But it's so important for the learning process. And that's where all this structure and these techniques come in that give you the tools you need to present your ideas confidently.
It's like we're building a suit of armor for the philosophical battlefield.
I like that. And remember, it's not about winning or losing. It's about engaging, testing your ideas, refining your thinking.
This conversation has totally changed how I think about philosophical writing. It's not just about following rules. It's about developing a mindset.
Yes,
Right.
It's a way of thinking. That goes beyond the classroom.
I'm starting to see that. Okay, what else does this chapter have for us? What else can help us navigate this philosophical terrain?
Well, it goes back to the sample essay, the one about Hobbes' Divine Command Theory.
Oh, yeah. The philosophical thriller. Tell me more.
The chapter points out that even though it's a complex topic, the essay actually has a very simple structure.
Simple? Really? I always thought philosophical writing was supposed to be, all convoluted and difficult.
It can be. But this essay shows you that you don't have to sacrifice clarity for complexity. They use this technique called parallel construction.
Parallel construction. Not familiar with that one.
It means using similar grammatical structures to emphasize related ideas. Like in this essay, the author uses a series of parallel sentences to outline the tenets of Hobbes' theory.
Oh, so it's about creating like a rhythm in the writing, making it easier to follow.
Exactly. And it also strengthens your argument because it highlights the logical connections between your ideas.
That's so interesting. It's like these little stylistic choices can make a big difference to how clear and persuasive our writing is.
You got it. And the chapter, it encourages us to pay attention to those details. Think not just about what we're saying, but how we're saying it.
I'm feeling a lot more confident about my own philosophical writing now.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm still a little nervous about actually starting, like putting pen to paper.
That's totally normal. It can feel daunting staring at that blank page, especially with these big philosophical ideas swirling around. But the chapter has some advice for overcoming that.
Okay, good. I need all the advice I can get.
They suggest starting with something called freewriting.
Freewriting? What's that?
It's basically brainstorming on paper. You set a timer, like 10 minutes, and you just write whatever comes to mind. No worrying about grammar, spelling, anything.
So just let it all out, no judgment.
Yep. The goal is to break through that block, the fear of writing something wrong.
That sounds very freeing. I can see how that would help get the ideas flowing. But what do you do with all those thoughts after you've finished freewriting?
Then comes the real work. The chapter suggests you go back and you look for patterns, connections, interesting ideas that emerged.
So it's like mining for gold. We're digging through all those raw thoughts, looking for the gems.
Exactly. And once you've found those gems, you can start organizing them, using the outline and the techniques we've talked about to build a strong essay.
This is great. It's like we're taking this huge, scary task and breaking it down into smaller, more manageable steps.
That's the power of having a framework and tools. It lets you approach the task strategically.
This deep dive has been so helpful already. I'm feeling way more prepared to face those philosophy essays now. But before we move on, you mentioned intellectual courage earlier. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Sure, it's such a crucial part of philosophical writing. The chapter really emphasizes that it's not just about presenting your own ideas, it's also about engaging with the ideas of others.
So we're not just building our own little philosophical worlds.
Right.
We have to go out there and interact with the ideas we encounter.
Right. And that interaction, it can take many forms. You can agree, disagree, build upon, challenge, even reinterpret those ideas.
It sounds very dynamic, a conversation rather than a lecture. But how do we actually do this in our writing? How do we show that we're engaging with other people's ideas?
Well, the chapter gives a few strategies. First, you need to accurately represent the views you're discussing. Don't distort them or oversimplify them. Just make them easier to attack.
So it's about being intellectually honest, even when I disagree with the ideas.
Absolutely. Give those ideas a fair hearing. Present them in their strongest form, even if you ultimately disagree.
That's a good point. It's easy to, sort of create a straw man argument, to make the opposing view seem weaker than it is.
Yeah, but this chapter is pushing us to be better than that, to engage with respect and rigor.
Okay, I like that. And then once I've presented those views accurately, what next?
Then you need to provide your own arguments, why you agree or disagree, with clear reasoning.
Right, so I can't just say, this philosopher is wrong, and leave it at that.
Nope. You have to back it up. With evidence, with logic, show that you've thought it through.
It's like I have to be the lawyer and the judge all at the same time. Presenting my case, but also weighing the evidence.
I like that analogy. And it raises an interesting question. How do we know when we've done enough? How do we know if our argument is strong enough? That's where critical thinking comes in. You need to anticipate the objections to your arguments and address them head on.
So it's like you game of chess. I have to think several moves ahead and anticipate what my opponent might say.
Exactly. And by doing that, you strengthen your position and show a deeper understanding of the whole issue.
This is amazing. This whole deep dive is making me feel so much more confident about engaging with these philosophical ideas.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's all about empowering you to think critically.
It's not just about writing the essay. It's about becoming a more, thoughtful person, a better thinker.
That's exactly it. Okay, we've covered a lot here in part 2. Maybe it's a good time to take another break, let this all sink in, and then we'll come back for the final part of our deep dive.
All right, we're back. Ready to wrap up this deep dive into structuring a philosophical essay. I have to say I'm feeling much less intimidated now.
That's great. It's amazing how much of a difference a little structure can make, right?
It really is. But before we declare ourselves philosophy essay experts, is there anything else Chapter 3 has for us? Any other hidden gems?
There is one more thing that I think really ties in with this idea of intellectual courage we were talking about.
Okay, tell me more.
So the chapter reminds us that philosophical writing, it's not just about presenting your own ideas, it's also about engaging with the ideas of others.
Oh, right. So we're not just building our own little philosophical worlds. We have to actually go out there and interact with other ideas, other perspectives.
Exactly. And that interaction, it can take many different forms. You can agree with those ideas, you can disagree, you can build upon them, challenge them, even reinterpret them.
It sounds very dynamic. It's like a conversation, not just a lecture.
Right. But how do we actually do this in our writing? How do we show that we're really engaging with these other ideas?
Yeah, good question.
The chapter gives us a few strategies. First, you have to accurately represent the views you're discussing. Don't distort them or oversimplify them just to make them easier to attack.
So even if I disagree with an idea, I have to present it fairly, give it a fair hearing.
Exactly. Intellectual honesty is key. You have to present those ideas in their strongest form, even if you ultimately disagree with them.
That's a good reminder. Because it's easy to, fall into that trap of making the opposing view seem weaker than it actually is.
Right. It's called the straw man fallacy. And this chapter is really pushing us to be better than that, to engage with those ideas rigorously and respectfully.
Okay, I like that. So I presented the other view fairly. What's next?
Then you have to provide your own arguments, why you agree or disagree. And those arguments need to be well-reasoned.
So I can't just say, this philosopher is wrong and leave it at that.
No, you need to back it up with evidence, with logic. Show your reader you've really thought this through.
So I have to be like a lawyer and a judge all at once. I present my case, but then I also have to weigh the evidence.
Yes, that's a great analogy. Which raises another interesting point. How do we know when we've done enough, when our argument is strong enough?
Right. How do I know when to stop?
That's where critical thinking is so important. You need to be able to anticipate the objections to your arguments and then address them head on.
So it's like a game of chess. I have to think several moves ahead.
Exactly. You anticipate what your opponent might say. And by doing that, you not only strengthen your position, you also show a deeper understanding of the issue.
This is so helpful. This whole deep dive, it's really changed how I think about philosophical writing. And not just the writing itself, but the whole process of thinking critically, engaging with ideas.
That's what it's all about. It's not just about writing the essay. It's about becoming a better thinker.
It's like this chapter is secretly a guide to becoming a more thoughtful, more engaged human being.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. These ideas, these principles, they're not just for writing a good essay, they're for life.
Well said. I'm definitely walking away feeling more confident and more inspired to keep those philosophical gears turning. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Keep exploring those big ideas.